I knew there'd be a lot of kids here, so I tried and racked my mind with how to make this an enjoyable experience for the parents and grandparents holding kids. I got to tell you, even though I'm a father of two kids, my mind is adult and youth, and I'm really not very good at little kids. Youth, oh my word, I can knock it out of the park. All right, and adults, I'm getting there. And little kids, though, I'm like skating on ice with no skates. It's a struggle, but I'm gonna do my best. I'm gonna do my best. On the top of those worksheets, though, it says kind of the title of my sermon is "Kid Jesus," and I came up with that because when I was growing up, and maybe when you were growing up too, my older brother would always call me, who happens to be here today, would always call me when he'd introduce me to his friends. He'd be like, "Oh, this is my kid brother, Zach." So that's always what he would say is, "This is my kid brother." And so as I was thinking about what we're going to talk about and focus on in Jesus and this age bracket that Jesus is, that this is kid Jesus. Okay, so it's no disrespect to Jesus. I know who he is and how amazing he is. All right, but I was using that correlation based on what my brother used to call me. Maybe that's something that older brothers always do, my kid brother. But anyway, the Bible really goes, it has a huge chunk missing of Jesus' life. It kind of goes from the birth that we all just celebrated at Christmas, and then it goes to Jesus meeting the Magi, the wise men, and there's a lot of things that we've added into that story. But really, a lot of people believe that was like around when Jesus was like 2 years old. Which, by the way, I just have to throw this in here. The star, or the lining of Saturn and Jupiter that everyone kept calling the Star of Bethlehem, friends, that's not the star that Jesus was born under. First of all, that's not a star. Okay, it's two planets lining up. Because, so many things. This thing's lasted for so long because Jesus... the Magi, when the Magi went to Herod, well, there's a reason why Herod killed everyone 2 years and younger. Because the star was there for so long that that was what they believe. Okay, so if I get this number of people, this age bracket, I could all hit Jesus, okay, the Son of God during that time. And so that's why that's that age bracket, okay? And I can promise you that this little lighting of Saturn and Jupiter for that one evening is not the star of Jesus. This was a supernatural event, and there's no scientific way you can try to explain it. Okay, this was a supernatural event that God made, all right? Just had to throw that in there. That was not even in my notes. All right, but so we know about Jesus' life from about birth till 2, maybe 3 years old, okay, when we just read about Simeon and him coming and being dedicated to the Lord. And then we don't know anything really until the Gospels start back up in Jesus' early 30s when he started his ministry. So there's really nothing except one little bit of chapter 2 in Luke. And that's what we're going to focus here today. It's just this one little chapter of Jesus at age 12. Jesus at age 12. And as Jesus had this huge chunk of life kind of forgotten, like what's not covered, like, oh, this is not really, must not be really important in the grand scheme of our faith and salvation. But as Jesus had this huge amount of that we don't get, that it's kind of his forgotten time, I also have this same feeling of an insignificant part of my life. And let me kind of let you know what that is. So there was a joke in my house, and when I say a joke in my house, growing up, it wasn't really funny to me at all. I was the root of it. I was the joke. But my parents had this picture frames made up for each of their kids' birth. And it's just really pretty, and it has a picture of the baby in there, and then it has around it like their birth date and the time they were born and where they were born, and it was a really pretty frame. And I remember looking down in the basement, seeing my brothers, the chosen one, my brothers around it, and seeing his time and date and all that stuff. and just kind of looking, and then sure enough, I found my little sisters, and I'm like, wow, that's awesome. And I'm like, where's my frame? And I remember, where's my frame? And going to my mom, where's my frame? Why don't I have a frame? I'm one of your kids, and oh, well, that person made those for my other two, but they didn't make one for you. And so, and just feeling that, and then asking, well, and every time I go to my parents, I'm like, hey, what time was I born? And they're always like, well, I think it's in the afternoon. I remember it kind of being in the afternoon, later afternoon, and we rushed off of work, and we went, and you were born in the afternoon, and I'm like, well, if I had a picture frame that had the name and the date on it, everyone would know exactly what time I was born. I'm sorry about that, guys. Middle child hang up. I'm good now. We can move on. So it seems the gospel authors left out a great deal of Jesus' life between ages 3 to about 30, except for this short section from Luke chapter 2, verses 41 through 52, when Jesus was 12 years old. People following along, I just gave you an answer. 12 years old. Little students that are using the notes, 12 years old. Now, I can tell you for sure that this account, I think, does a great job of illustrating that Jesus was both fully man and fully God. And as we go through this story, I hope to show you how this story illustrates that. But to cover this story, we're gonna take a deep look into just breaking it down. And this story was written by Luke, and I think it's important for us to understand who Luke was. Luke was a physician. He was a Gentile Christian and a companion of Paul. All right, and as I think about why this story was in the gospel and not in any other of the gospels, is because who Luke was as a physician. Now a physician would be someone that would be looking for facts and looking for details and wanting all of the background in order to make a big aha moment at the end. And so they would not want to skip any details. As you would go to the doctor wants to know, tell me feeling. Well, this is not, my head hurts. Why do you care about down here? Trust me, I need to know every single detail. And so Luke the physician was going through all of Jesus' life in order to get the full picture of who Jesus is. And so I believe that Luke was probably interviewing people in Jesus' life, like his mother or his brothers, in order to ask him, who was Jesus like as a kid? If you want to know who I really was as a kid, I'm not going to ask, someone like Cora, who's known me at church pretty much my whole life. I'm going to ask my mom or my brother or a father, someone like that, who's known me my entire life. All right, and so Luke went to probably Mary, and as you read this story, and as I try to prove that, I really believe that Luke was interviewing Mary, the mother of Jesus, and this story comes from that interview time. Because and the only reason we get one sums up who Jesus was in one story. I think as Luke was studying, he's like, man, I really can't spend a whole lot of time because this is a long book, and I want people to read the whole thing. And so Luke was like, if I can get one story that kind of sums up who Jesus was, this is going to be it. And this story really does a great job, in my opinion. And so anyway, let's move on to, let's get into this story. This short encounter for this 12-year-old Jesus. And let's read it. Luke chapter 2, verse 41 through 52. Would you please follow along with me? Every year, Jesus' parents went to Jerusalem. That's an answer. Jerusalem for the Passover festival. That's another answer. Sorry, adults, you're going to follow along with us. When Jesus was 12 years old, they attended this Passover festival as usual. After the celebration was over, they started home to Nazareth. That's another answer. Nazareth, Jesus' home. But Jesus stayed behind in Jerusalem, which is where the festival was. His parents didn't miss him at first because they assumed he was among the other travelers. But when he didn't show up that evening, they started looking for him among their relatives and friends. When they couldn't find him, they went back to Jerusalem to search for him there. 3 days later, that's another answer. 3 days later, they finally discovered Jesus. Where? In the temple. Another answer. sitting among the religious teachers, listening to them and asking questions. All who heard Jesus were amazed at his understanding and his answers. His parents didn't know what to think. "Son," his mother said to him, "why have you done this to us? Your father and I have been frantic, searching for you everywhere." "But why did you need to search?" he asked. "Didn't you know I must be in my Father's house?" But they didn't understand what he meant. Then he returned to Nazareth with them and was obedient to them. And his mother stored all these things in her heart. Jesus grew in wisdom and in stature and in favor with God and all the people. So, again, I just want to kind of go through this story because I think there's a lot of things that we kind of can skim over and not truly understand. So it's the Passover feast, and for all Jewish men, you had to go. So if you were a follower and you were a Jew and you were a man, you went. And that meant you brought your family along with you. Okay? So they're heading to Jerusalem, which again is about a 3 days journey. And so they head out to go and to fulfill the requirements of partaking in this feast in Jerusalem. And so as they walk from Nazareth to Jerusalem, they get there, and I can just see a 12-year-old Jesus excited. Okay, it's almost like probably for us, a 12-year-old, we're taking them to their first Cardinal game. All right, and they're super pumped up about, entering into the big city. You start seeing the arch in Collinsville, and you're like, I'm almost there. I can't wait to experience it. And so you're heading in, and just the excitement. And Jesus is super exciting for this festival that he gets to be a part of in the big city of Jerusalem, not Nazareth, the small little town. And as he gets and enters in, this is an opportunity for Jesus that he probably saw family and relatives that he hadn't seen forever, or maybe at all. And so as all these regions come in, because it's not like at our Christmas time where we can just drive and go see anyone, it was a long on-foot travel. Okay, and so there's lots of people he probably never saw. And in Jesus' little synagogue in Nazareth, but here at this festival, this Passover festival, the greatest rabbis would be at the temple, sitting around the wall of the temple with their disciples in front of them, teaching the whole time during this Passover feast. And I'm sure Jesus was just like in awe. Yes, he's fully God and he's fully man, but yet he has this divine spirit inside of him that I'm sure he, as we see, he craved to hear these rabbis and to understand the knowledge that they had as he tried to get closer and closer to God. I would imagine Jesus was deeply moved by this Passover meal as the family went and celebrated as the stories of God delivering the people out of Egypt and delivering them out of the wilderness into Israel. I'm sure he was just moved by that, as every part of the meal represent or was symbolic of what God had did to provide and to bring the people into the promised land. The time, Mary and Joseph, Jesus' earthly parents, met up with the whole crowd, because when they traveled from Nazareth, it was like, all right, people from Vandalia, we're heading out to St. Louis to go celebrate this event. And so we all kind of caravan together so we can all travel together and meet each other's needs and not be alone, because the road was a dangerous journey. It was a dangerous time. And so moving in a group of people that could look out for you and look out for your kids was something that they would do. And so they would all be traveling. And so they were meeting together to head back to Nazareth. And so they began their journey traveling back on this dangerous road, the Jericho Road, which, by the way, if you remember the Jericho Road, that's where the Samaritan got beat and his money was taken from him and he was robbed, and the Samaritan helped the Jewish man. That Jesus would later on tell that story about this Jericho Road that he traveled as a young boy in order to get to the Passover feast. And so Mary and Joseph get to the first campsite, wherever that might be, where everyone stops to rest for the night before they got home. All right, and as they get there, they're looking for their kid. And something that I didn't realize, but makes a whole lot of sense. But at this time when they would caravan, like a husband and a wife wouldn't necessarily be together. Okay, the women would all be together and the men would all be together in order to travel. And I don't know if necessarily if that was to keep purity, or if it was just like the women wanted to gab and the men wanted to gab. The men wanted to talk about their carpentry stuff and whatever and fishing, and the women wanted to talk about unleavened bread. I don't know. But anyway, and so as they're traveling, a lot of times the kids would switch back and forth with who they would be with. Okay, so maybe these children would be with the dad, the men, and these children be with the moms or whatever. But so for you not to know that Jesus isn't with you, as we read through the scripture, that's not uncommon. Okay, because it could be with a relative, they could be hanging out with a cousin, or it could be hanging out with an aunt or an uncle, or whatever. But or Mary could have thought he was with Joseph, or Joseph could have thought he was with Mary. And as a parent, I think we've all been there before. That we've all experienced that. Okay, and so they're traveling, and so they get to their caravan stops, and they're at this campsite, and Mary and Joseph meet up and is like, "Hey, where's Jesus?" And the shock and the gut feeling of emptiness inside of your stomach if you're like, and so I'm sure they run from campsite to campsite looking for, finding every 12-year-old boy and like looking underneath his cloak or, is this Jesus? No. And opening, have you seen our son? Have you seen our son? And they're going everywhere. And so they're freaking out trying to figure out where Jesus is. And at some point they decide, probably at first light the next day, they decide to head back against the grain to head back to Jerusalem. And I'm sure you guys have, I'll admit it, I have, where you're going against the grain and everyone's coming because you forgot something or you've messed up or you're looking for your kid, and so you're fighting against the grain going back towards them, and you're heading into this dangerous path, this dangerous road by yourself, but you're going to do it because you can't find your kid. And so all along the way you're like, have you seen my son? Have you seen a 12-year-old boy running around? Have you seen where he might be? Have you seen, he looks like this, and have you seen him? And just freaking out and not really caring about how people might be judging you, but because you are so scared that your kid might be abducted by somebody, or your kid might be hurt or stuck or whatever. It's obvious that Mary and Joseph had given a lot of trust to Jesus, that he wasn't right on their hip the whole journey there and back. So Jesus had a little bit of leeway, you can tell, and I think that would be expected based on who he was. And I think we all kind of picture Jesus as the perfect child. And so you would see that. And plus, please understand that Jesus, again, is age 12. Kids, get this. That means if he's 12, he's either 1 year away or maybe months away from being 13. And in the Jewish religion, at age 13, you were an adult. So Jesus was months, if not a year, away from being an adult. So, that kind of freedom, you can assume that was to be expected. I'm sure that Mary and Joseph retraced their steps all the way back. Could you imagine the feeling that they had? Not just the fact that they lost their own child, but they lost God's son. Oh, my word. The thoughts that were going through my mind, if I was Joseph, I would be like, oh, I'm going to get struck by lightning. I'm dead right now. I'm going to turn to a pillar of salt right now. I lost God's son. I'm in big trouble. Or just the thoughts, the long-awaited Messiah that everyone has been praying for and people have been asking. And then I think of Simeon, and he was waiting his whole life, and we just lost him. We lost the long-awaited Messiah, and we just blew it for everybody. He was supposed to be the remission of sin and supposed to save the world, and we lost him. We lost him. At some point, Mary and Joseph finally made it to the temple, and I thought, how did they find Jesus there? How did they know to go search there? And I thought, maybe they were going to the temple to pray for forgiveness or to seek God's guidance. God, I'm so sorry. I lost your son. I lost your son. I know you know where he is. Can you tell us? Can you tell us, maybe through a rabbi or a priest, where he might be? Because I'm really sorry. I'm really sorry. Forgive us for doing this. Or perhaps, which is more likely, they remember Jesus talking about wanting to go to the temple. That Jesus kept on bugging them, hey, I really want to go to the temple. And you guys, if you're a parent or even an aunt or an uncle or whatever, and you've taken a kid to like any place, a store or Walmart, the kid will find something Maybe at Walmart and they see the toy section, they bug you. Can I go to the toy section? Can we please go to the later if we have time? And we usually forget about that or we put it off. But they bug you and bug you and bug you. And then soon enough, you might be nearby that section and you turn around and they're gone. And they're exactly where they've been bugging you to go to. And so I wonder if Jesus had been bugging them the whole time. Can we go back to the temple? Can we go back to the temple? I want to hear what the rabbis were teaching. There's this one rabbi that kept teaching that I want to hear what he has to say. And so I think that that's probably what Mary and Joseph were experiencing, and maybe Mary and Joseph were like, hey, I remember, as they're retracing their steps, I remember Jesus kept talking about going to the temple. Let's try the temple. And Mary and Joseph all of a sudden see their son sitting at the feet of the rabbis being taught as he taught their disciples. And you know how Mary reacted. All of you know how Mary reacted. Son, why would you make us worry like this? Why would you do this to us? And I know Mary is a saint and an unbelievable, humble servant of the Lord. This was a story told, and we don't necessarily know the volume level, where the volume level was on Mary at this time, but I can assure you, based on my control over my children and my wife's control, the volume was at probably a 10. Jesus! Where have you been? It's been 3 days. I thought you were dead. I was worried sick, scared to death. How could you do this to us? How could you have treated us this way? And just the frantic spirit that she had. 12-year-old Jesus' response is not like anything that I would have done. I think I just would have been quiet and shameful or like, I messed up. I'm really sorry. I'm really sorry. But that's not what Jesus says. 12-year-old Jesus says, but why did you need to search for me? Not sure that would have been a smart thing for me to say. Think it would have ended very poorly for me to say that. But why did you need to search for me? Didn't you know I must be in my Father's house? And at the time, Mary did not understand. Mary and Joseph did not understand what exactly Jesus was saying to her. But it says later on, which I love, and we're going to get into that a little bit later, but it says, and his mother stored all this up in her heart. Stored all these things up in her heart. And I think that's, again, it's very important. Again, this really makes me think that this story was a story that was told to Luke from Mary. And the reason why, and maybe you'll think this is funny or not, but notice that if this would have been, it says she didn't understand exactly what Jesus was saying. So she wasn't looking at Jesus as the Son of God. She didn't understand what he was saying about, why did you have to search for me? I was with my Father. I had to be with my Father. So she had her fully man goggles on Jesus was fully man. He was my son. He was my boy, my flesh and blood in her mind. And for those of you that are parents or even have had to care for kids or whatever, I mean, you would freak out. 3 days, I would have been freaking out. Freaking out. But notice the way this story was told, it's kind of tampered down. It doesn't really tell about how crazy she went or how even what she did to Jesus, maybe grab him by the arm, I can't believe you did this. I can see some dragging him. You're going to Nazareth with us now. And dragging him all the way back to the home. But she didn't. It doesn't say that. So again, I kind of feel like it was Mary telling this story, and she didn't understand. And how many of us don't want the world to know when we fall off, we break the hinges as upset as we are. And so we tell kind of like an abridged, oh yeah, I got upset. I said some things I probably shouldn't have said. But notice the author says his mother stored in her heart. And she realized what really motivated Jesus down the road. And as I read that, I thought this is how the story went. She probably saw it she probably kind of saw the situation as, that's my boy, my flesh and blood boy, and I was so scared that I lost my son, and I didn't remember that this is not really my son. That he is above just my son. He is the Son of God. And I didn't understand that. And so Mary took it as a worldly thing, and then later on down the road, as Jesus got older, and maybe she remembered this, or maybe she got home and got, less frantic, and she realized, you know what? I get it. I get who he is. I understand it now. And as she's retelling this story, as Luke, the physician's coming to her, tell us about Jesus. And she said, I have the perfect story to tell you about Jesus. That he got lost, that we lost him for 3 days, and we found him right where he belongs. We found him right where he desired to be, with the Father. And that is because from the moment he was born, he was connected to the Father God. And he desired to be with the Father God, because that's his Father. He was living on mission, much far and above what any normal 12-year-old boy's desires are. If my mom couldn't find me, I was playing sports. I was playing with neighbors or video games. I can guarantee you I was not in the church for 3 days listening to a sermon or something like that. I can promise you that. But that was Jesus. And I love the response when they find Jesus, that as Jesus was teaching the rabbis and listening and asking questions, it says, and all who understood were amazed at his understanding and his answers. Because Jesus in this story shows that he is both fully man and fully God. Okay? And this is where I see this. Because how many of us, even when we were growing up, we got lost in something because we were just a normal person and we're playing games or outside playing, and we lose track of time. Not that we did it maliciously, but we just lost track of time doing so. I can't tell you how many times that my mom would yell she'd open the screen door and yell, "It's dinner time!" And she'd just yell our names. And Luke and I would know a mile away. We could hear it a mile away. And we would know, I'd say this, "Shh, shh. Did you hear that?" And then you'd hear it again, "Zach!" And we'd take off and run. Because we knew, God's got to go, it's dinner time. And we would run. This is pre-cell phone days. And we would run back home. And we knew that if we didn't get home in time, we would be in big trouble because she'd become worried and not know where we were. And so we had to stay close enough to where we can hear our mom yell from outside the house for us to come in. And so Jesus just got wrapped into being in that moment with the Father, to hearing about Jesus. Like we would get wrapped into a basketball game or a game with the neighborhood boys. Jesus was wrapped into feeding on the Father, feeding and experiencing Jesus. And so I see that he's fully man, but yet it says that all who understood were amazed at his understanding and answers, and how that is fully God. And how that's not something that I think a 12-year-old would long to be, is to be feeding and understanding this knowledge that the rabbis, the top rabbis, were preaching and teaching, that they would understand that. That shows his divineness, in my opinion. I remember as I was thinking about Jesus' mom and dad getting to him and finding him, and this whole idea of not finding them, and where have you been? And Mary and Joseph's first initial instinct is to kind of blame Jesus. Like, where have you been? Why would you do this to us? And I'm like, he's the 12-year-old. You're the adults. Where were you? Where were you, parents? Watching after him. And I can think of countless times that maybe have happened to me in my life. One in particular story, and I already got this approval to say this, but I remember one time I was at honor course practice at the old junior high, and I think it was every Monday, I can't remember, at 5 o'clock, and I remember leaving the junior high and sitting outside waiting, and it's all the parents come pick up their kids. And I remember sitting there and waiting for about 15, 20 minutes, and no one was there. And the school was locked behind me, and I couldn't get in to make a phone call. And so I'm sitting at the junior high, and we're supposed to get picked up at 5, and it's about 6 o'clock at night. And I'm sitting there waiting for someone to pick me up. No one's coming, no way to call anyone. And so I'm like, interesting. I guess I'm lost. No picture frame. And so I decide I'm going to go ahead and walk home. And it's about 3 3 or 4 mile walk, and we had learned a way to not have to walk on 185 and stuff like that all the way back to our house. And so I walked on the train tracks. Just my older brother taught me all that stuff. I walked on the train tracks, got all the way back home, and made it to the house. I remember walking in about, 6:30, 7 o'clock, something like that. And my mom saying, "Where have you been? It is, and going after me." And I'm like, I did a little bit of Jesus. I did a little Jesus thing. I said, "Hey, what day is it?" "Monday." "What time is it?" 7. Where am I always at from 3 to 5? I am so sorry. And so I totally understood that experience that Jesus was having right there. And I tell these stories not to the picture frame in this story, not to say that my mom was a bad mom, because she's quite contrary, was a wonderful, amazing mom. I could never have asked for a better one for all of my parents. And I'm being real, and I know I am your favorite, even though I didn't have a picture frame. But we all make mistakes as parents. Isn't that the truth? I can't tell you how many times that I have made a mistake, and I've only been a parent for 9 years. But how many times I've made a mistake, and it's so much I can't even comprehend how many times I've messed up. And it's not like we have a manual that teaches us how to be a parent, and I'm a guy anyway, so if we had a manual, I wouldn't read it. I just know how to do it. But Mary and Joseph are the same. They're human beings who make mistakes. And so as parents, and even aunts and uncles or grandparents, I just want to encourage you to not expect yourself to be the best and perfect. Okay? We're not called to be perfect. We're called to lean on God as parents. Okay? Again, we don't have a manual that tells us exactly how to do this. We kind of shoot from the hip and lean on God and our spouse to get through this and to do this successfully. And Mary and Joseph had the Son of God, the most perfect child you could ever have. And I'm going to glean that that's the case. And they still messed up. And they left him. And so I just wanted to encourage you parents today that even if you're struggling, even if you feel like you're not doing a good job, even if you feel like you've made mistakes, and there are times I turn to Megan all the time and I'm like, we failed. Like this past week, we were up at Christmas and my nieces and nephew are eating, instead of a cupcake, they're eating celery sticks. And I'm like, can't get our kids to eat anything but chicken and pizza. And they're eating celery sticks for a dessert. I'm like, what have we done? We have failed miserably as parents. And I can't tell you how many times we've said that, but that's not the case. Okay? And there are times where I know you guys as parents or as grandparents or whatever feel like you've failed, maybe because your child is wayward and is lost in sin, or maybe not walking with Christ, or maybe just rotten or whatever. But you are called to love them and to do your very best. If you are loving them, you're praying for them, and you're leading them and being an example of Jesus, God will do the rest. Every human being has a choice to follow and not to follow Jesus, and that is their decision. It's not your job to make them follow Jesus. It's your job to show them the way and to be the example. And we're not called to hold that guilt and shame in our lives. Okay? Be an example of who God wants you to be, and God, the Holy Spirit, is doing what He does very well. And He is working in their heart, and He is using your life and your prayers to work in the lives of those people. Okay? So I just want you, hopefully that's an encouragement to you, not to take that guilt and shame of the feeling like you're a failure, because truly you're not. If you give up on your kid, then you have failed. If you give up and you say, I'm done, I'm no longer praying for you, I'm no longer whatever, then you have failed. But if you are continuing to pray for your kid and you're an example and you're a loving example of who Jesus is, you have not failed. You are doing exactly what you were meant to do when God blessed you with that child. Okay, and that's also to uncles and aunts who have nieces and nephews. That's the same message to you, that it's your responsibility to be the surrogate parent to those people, to those children. And so I just want to challenge you in that today. And I want to leave you with this last final note. And so as I kind of said, I decided to take Mary and Joseph's example of them taking Jesus to the Passover. And what a great example as a parent to take their kids to the Passover festival, which in our words, that means they're taking their kids to church. Any opportunity to experience Jesus, Mary and Joseph were taken to. Even if it was a 3-day journey, they wanted Jesus to experience God at the Passover festival. And as parents, we need to be doing the same. And so I decided, as I wanted to be an example to my kids, we sat down this week and we read this story. And I said, William and Mackenzie, listen to this story very carefully. I want you to tell me what you got out of it. And this is our final points. Okay? And then we're closing. So, Kendra, you guys can go ahead and come up. But this is our final points. And this comes from my 9-year-old and my 6-year-old. And I think this is a lasting truth that we all need to get from this story. Okay? And it goes like this. We read it. I said, Mackenzie, what did you get from this story? And she said this. Jesus was left behind like a normal kid. So Mackenzie understood that Jesus was a normal person living the same difficult life that we live here today. Okay, that Jesus came in, put on flesh, and he lived the same life that we lived and was treated normally. While his mom punishing him or yelling at him, and he was left behind like I think some of our parents probably left us behind at times. Jesus was the same. She also said that we should act like Jesus and to trust God because Jesus wasn't scared when he was lost because he was with God. Isn't that amazing? I had a 9-year-old pick that up. That he wasn't scared because he was with God. So we need to trust God and be close to him. Then my 6-year-old son said this, that Jesus was lost, or when Jesus was lost, that he knew to go to the temple. Isn't that amazing? That when Jesus was lost, he knew where he should be. When he didn't see his parents, if that's just what he's getting out of this, but when he didn't see his parents, he knew to go where God was. And so he went to the temple. I think a lot of times when we're lost, that's exactly where we need to go. Maybe not necessarily church, but maybe we need to go where Jesus is. Go where God is when we feel lost in our life. And then his last thing was, it's his Father. This is what William said. It's his Father, and he loves him, and he wanted to be with him for a while. Wow. Just like William wants to be with his daddy for a while and wants to spend time with his daddy, he knew that Jesus wanted to spend time with his daddy. And so Jesus went where his daddy was and just had to spend time with his daddy. I think those 4 points from this story are better than anything I could ever have said throughout the whole thing. And those came from children. And I truly believe the Holy Spirit used my kids and spoke to my kids at that time to speak to us this morning. That when we're lost, we need to go where God is. And that Jesus wanted to spend time with his daddy. And we need to spend time with our Father too. That's where we need to be. We need to spend time with our Father as Jesus spent time with his Father.